Hey, this is Sahil. You're listening to the Studio Twentyone Show, where I talk with the people designing the Bitcoin products that we use every day. And honestly, my hope is that through these casual, walking, flowing conversations, we're actually walking on a trail. You get these real world insights on designing these Bitcoin products directly from the people in the trenches, right? So today we have Sasha Klein. He works at Unchained. He's a front-end engineer. I've worked with him for a while. When I was at Unchained, we overlapped. We've worked on some other projects in the past. He has a really interesting background, English, a bunch of other stuff like philosophy. Really fun, really good friend of mine. I really think you're going to enjoy it. Join me on my walk and talk with Sasha and hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Thanks for being here, Sasha. This is very formal.
It's my pleasure.
This is extremely formal.
All mine.
No, yeah. No, really, this is great. And for anyone listening, we're walking again. If you listen to the episode with Paul, we're basically taking the same trail. This is where I walked with Paul. This was
like right here?
Yeah. So right here, we took the same trail, same path. You're in good company. Except last time it was 100 degrees. Now it's like 80. So Austin's cooling down.
Perfect.
It's the best.
It's been perfect for like a week and a half.
But yeah, dude. So I was doing some homework because I didn't want to do a ton of homework, but because I know you were safe to say we're really close friends in Austin. But I did want to look up because I actually don't know what you did before Unchained. So I saw some companies on there and I wanted to just not to spend too long on this, but I just wanted to hear, like, how did you get from one place to the other? How did you end up at Unchained? Because that's where we worked together for a couple of years, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
So how did you end up at Unchained? How did you even become an engineer in the first place?
Yeah. Okay. So I went abroad after college. I was an English major, and I did sort of like a classic English major.
And this was like Harvard, right? Not to dox you, but
right. I went to China and worked in essentially I didn't teach English, but I did college counseling and taught other things in English in a pretty weird job for about a year, a little under a year. I ended up quitting it and then came back to visit my brother in San Francisco, sort of planning to live on the East Coast, decided to stay with him, and then gradually got pulled into tech. So I was...
so you weren't
applying, Oh, not at all. I was applying to law school.
Really?
I was looking into maybe being like a copywriter briefly because of the English major thing. Then I took some online free courses at like Stanford and other like these MOOCs for programming, and then tried to build out an application of my own for meat sales, and then got in over my head, joined a boot camp, started working with that boot camp after a period of time, after working with a startup in some guy's like bedroom, basically.
Yeah.
And then eventually got like normal jobs for classic San Francisco startups. So first as a coder for that boot camp, then the head of their Ruby on Rails education curriculum. And then bounced from that, I'm probably leaving something out, a design company.
So actually, really quick, before we get there, so how did were you learning more like front-endy stuff or like full stack, back-endy?
Originally, it was full stack, but a lot of back-end. So Ruby on Rails was like this technology that really, I think it was one of the first, just at least while I've been in tech, like massive demonstrations of time saving if you start to follow these patterns, where you used to have to have a whole team of systems engineers, back-end engineers, front-end engineers, lots of people to like plan out infrastructure, choose a database, go crazy to build something like like a blog or a Twitter type thing. And Ruby on Rails came out and you could build it in 20 minutes. It would be like really ugly, but there were these tools that made it accessible for a new person to get into tech. And there was actually a guy, Michael Hartle, who I think is a Bitcoiner now, who wrote like an incredible curriculum for that. And so I worked through that curriculum that just teaches you how to build a pretty robust website in Ruby on Rails.
So kind of lowered the barrier to entry almost.
Oh yeah, and Ruby's just a programming language, but it's not front end because it doesn't run in the browser. So it was used for configuring the database, the controllers, etc. And then you'd use HTML and a tiny bit of JavaScript at the time for the front end. I did that, and then when I left, I think the next thing I'm leaving something out here, but I ended up working for a design company. So it's like a design consultancy that would work with a bunch of companies and design out their next products or
I didn't even know that.
Something like that. And I ran their engineering team. So for some subset of the projects that they would design, we would then build them out, or build out, in some cases, these like full-fledged demos. There's a sort of weird job because very often you're building something that has like 90% of the front end functionality you'd eventually need, but which is just a demo. Because we work for instance, for Kaiser Permanente, and various factions within the company would want to overhaul their website in some way and want to give a great presentation and have millions of dollars to throw into that endeavor. And so they'd hire us to put together this incredibly high fidelity, beautiful prototype of what it could be, so they could do a great, board presentation or whatever, and then it would get tossed out and possibly rebuilt sort of like that. So weird job, but very, very fun.
So that's almost like you're building like MVPs almost. I don't know if that's right, if that's the right phrasing for that.
Some full projects, well, I mean, some of them were not viable. So MVP is in like minimum viable products. Some of them were just like
blue sky kind of
like Figma prototypes that are fully interactive in some insane way.
But you were working with
before Figma or what were the other ones? There were a whole bunch
Sketch.
Of cool.
Obviously before Sketch, Illustrator, Photoshop, all that stuff.
There's another one that was used for like phone apps or whatever, but before those things were really great.
Yeah.
I wonder what they're doing now so much. Probably more like actual functional build outs. But it's, like a weird job, but fun. Yeah, like Dreamweaver. There was one that's Principle,
yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
It was really fun from like a cultural perspective because I'd been in the sort of like small neckbeard startup world.
Yeah.
Like I'm watching Silicon Valley right now and like totally that. And then I remember interviewing for these guys and it's like you just go into a nice office with like quality Heath Ceramics. If anyone's been to San Francisco, it's like a great ceramic shop. And the CEO was really into like cocktails and everyone was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it was airy and bright. And I was like, oh man, I want to work here.
That's fun.
There were ladies in like non-zero quantities.
Non-zero.
Yeah, it was like it was just a better environment.
So how is all that? Maybe like if we all condense all that like at a high level. Also, there's some geese walking here.
Yeah,
they're very aggressive geese, to be honest with you. Yeah, you got to watch out for them. Yeah, I mean, how did those experiences like differ from like today, Unchained, right? Because I feel like Unchained is very unique, not just culturally. The team is very unique.
Oh
but, like, even the work you're doing like Bitcoin stuff.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that was very specific to a design company. So to answer it from the other perspective, which is there's often a lot of like a tug of war between, or there can be a tug of war between product and design.
Yeah.
And there are different methodologies. People will talk about agile, which is sort of like short term, just get this thing out, work in a team of peers who cross cut in terms of their functionality, right? And that's as opposed to waterfall. We were actually like a very waterfall oriented company in which design had the maximal say, because design would meet with the client, they'd pitch something really beautiful. The client would be like, oh, that's great. I want to like see this.
Yeah.
And then it's like, that is what you're building. And it doesn't matter if this minor animation takes you like an additional 2 weeks.
That was the point.
You're pretty much being held to that.
Wow.
And at Unchained, one of the nice things, there's engineering and product. I mean, our product teams are very technically savvy and plugged in.
Yeah.
And I think there isn't even a real sense of significant conflict between design and engineering.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to get out something functional and quality quickly, and everyone's usually willing to make trade-offs. And so
like McManus is very technical. Courtney's technical too. Like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So the lack of trade-offs is very frustrating at that company. And I came to feel, I'll interview people for like front-end or design-related roles.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I often ask is related to animation, because it's been my experience, maybe the tooling has gotten better for this, but like animation is one of those things for which a very small difference can take up huge quantities of time. And it's generally one of the things that I think has the least effect on user experience that's obviously very debatable. There's a sense of like lightness or ease that comes from animation that's really pleasant, or I think the word delightful is used very often. But I think the difference between a delightful and a not delightful design between two very delightful interactions can be hours or weeks of work. And also like there's probably a fine line between like delightful and functional, and then like if you go a little bit ahead, now you're just like distracting and annoying, and it just takes away from the experience. I think my sense of design from a front-end perspective, or like most of what I think about, is I guess it's called like user experience design more than visual design.
Yeah.
I think so much of what I think of as good design has to do with sussing out what is the core goal
Hmm.
of someone using a platform, and
Yeah.
then like making sure that you're making that goal as simple as possible, as intuitive as possible. And that is, I really think, like the vast majority of what we're trying to accomplish. And if you keep that as a North Star, it becomes clear how to prioritize things, what's extraneous, etc.
Yeah. So I mean, kind of a leading question, but do you feel like that experience at that job, which, like you said, was just there's no trade-offs, it's just like
Yeah.
idealized version. Maybe that's what led you to that philosophy. Because I will
Hmm.
say we worked together on a bunch of projects,
Yeah.
and I feel like you're very easy to work with in the sense that I think you have really good attention to detail from a design point of view. If there are edge cases that I missed or something,
Hmm.
you were easily able to put out something with good taste as a first try without me being like, ah, yeah, you gotta come back and
Yeah.
change something. So do you feel like you were like, what do you think led to that? Because it doesn't just come automatically for most people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was the work experience for sure. A lot of it, I mean, I also got interested in the topic before I started working there and after I was working there. So I read a bunch of books on design. I mean, the ones that jump out at me, the Design of Everyday Things
Yeah.
is a classic,
Mhm.
right? And that effectively, at least as I remember, has like very little to do with the visual and a lot to do with the communication of intent. So he's not talking about web design, he's talking about like a door and whether the handle of the door indicates that you should push on that door,
Yeah.
and the absence of the handle indicates that you could pull, absence of a handle indicates that you can only push on it, and how confusing it is to have a door that you ought to push on that has a big handle, with like a perfect space for your hand.
Mhm.
And just you have to think about the intention, sort of the goal of someone interacting with this, and how to communicate the goal of the tool or the goal of the individual. And that's really what it's about. And there's Don't Make Me Think is another sort of
Mhm.
small design book.
That's the
Similar
Krug.
similar
Yeah.
thought process. Just you're trying to reduce sort of the cognitive burden of someone interacting with your tool who is goal oriented and is not like, maybe Google or Facebook, wants to retain the customer for the longest period of time.
Yeah.
But really, most clients of whatever service you're building are trying to accomplish something. You're trying to suss out what they're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to make it as easy for them to do as possible. And that's how I tend to think about the design process. And yeah, it was like working there, the books. Also, I think working there was a lot just about like outside of the design process. You were sort of mentioning like being easy to work with. To the extent that's true, I mean, I think I also learned some stuff. We were a pretty sales-oriented company
Mm.
in a soft way. Like we'd pitch our designs to people, you get feedback. It was the customer's always first type of mentality.
Hmm.
Customer's always right. And I remember the CEO, who was, I think, just an exceptional salesperson, was always very good at wording things he wanted as options for the client with the trade-offs laid out clearly.
Oh,
So he
right.
was always
Yes.
convinced that, if he got pushback about something, the client is literally right. It doesn't matter. We're trying to do what makes them the most
Yeah.
happy, but we may think that what they think they want will not make them the most
Yeah.
happy. And so we advocate the full set of costs and benefits.
It's
And
so funny you say this because I
yeah.
was thinking about this the other day. Even if you're not like a client freelancer relationship,
Mm-hmm.
in some sense, even if you're an employee of a company, they're kind of your client in the sense that they're hiring you for a job.
Mm-hmm.
You can give multiple recommendations, pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the boss is right in the sense that they're paying
Mm-hmm.
you. But I like the way you frame that. It's like, yeah, here's a bunch of options, pros
Yeah.
and cons. I'll disagree and commit if you want to, but
It
this is
is
what I
actually,
recommend.
it's a particularly funny thing in the context of Bitcoin, because I feel like those of us building the products
Hmm.
have very strong opinions about how the products ought to be built, probably compared to the sort of intellectualized opinions of many of our clients, who are generally a little less obsessed with the technology and less familiar with how it works. And so there's a tendency to be like, BitKey comes out, and it was a very product-centered designed, user-centered design tool that said, like, what can we strip away that complicates things for a user? And I know there was a fair amount, I don't want to say it's overwhelming, but a fair amount of pushback on it, because like it doesn't have a screen, it needs a screen to validate the address.
Hmm.
or, this isn't a perfect security posture. And so we as designers or makers of these products have very strong opinions about them. And it makes it, I think, somewhat harder for us to like listen and respond. And there is a good give and take. We do, in fact, know more about like, there's a history of how people have lost their Bitcoin, et cetera. But
yeah, there's like a domain expertise almost.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how complicated even Bitcoin, like just putting cryptocurrency aside, is, that it's like really, really difficult to have full expertise over that domain.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some people who I think are like close to full experts, and they would certainly tell me they don't know like 90% of the stuff out there.
Ran into a friend, so we might have to edit some of that, and there's gonna be a weird, awkward cut here. That's okay. That's life. Anyway, but yeah, domain expertise. So I wanted, and I've never said this in my life, but I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
Let's double click on.
Oh God.
I did it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But no, I wanted to get on that. What you said about like.
I fucking hate that phrase.
I know, I really do as well. But what you said about like there's the domain expertise, and then there's the customers.
Right. So there is at least like a tug of war between the two of them.
Right. And then how do you bridge that, if at all? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I think my orientation is towards the customer. Like there's a trade-off. But I think a bunch of these debates are going on sort of within Bitcoin around, I'd say the Bitcoiners, or like more toxic Bitcoiners, longer term Bitcoiners, have a lot of opinions about like, you should self-custody.
Yeah.
You should self-custody in a wallet that is like not networked, like a cold wallet or a hard wallet, hardware device, whatever you want to call it. You should probably do multi-sig. You shouldn't add a password to your multi-sig.
Yeah.
There are all of these strong opinions, and they are validated by history and experience. But at the end of the day, if we think about our goals, which is to simplify as much as possible the like onboarding of people. Well, I mean, you're working on a orthogonal part of Bitcoin, but like, for Unchained, we're trying to make it easy. And for Bitcoin as an ecosystem, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for the widest range of people to get into this thing. Because I think there's a flywheel effect. I mean, people criticize the number go up stuff, but as the number goes up, more engineers enter the space, more money enters the space, there's more funding for the businesses. There's like a broader set of people who are using it, who just drive everything forward. And I do think you want to create a broad tent. And to do that, you have to meet people where they are as opposed to where you wish they would be.
Dude.
And I think in that spectrum between what the Bitcoiner wants and what the customer wants, I'm more towards the Peter McCormack side of the like, they shouldn't have to know pretty much anything. At some point in the future, we want to be in a place where this is effectively, people think of it as money, and you send your money. You're not like signing a transaction and broadcasting a transaction and like tracking a mempool. You're just sending your money. You don't know whether it's on Lightning or on Bitcoin or on Cashew. That's where we're driving. We don't know exactly how to get there, but bit by bit, we move in that direction, I think.
Hey, just a really quick break to tell you about the Studio 21 newsletter. If you're interested in Bitcoin and design, every month I highlight a few key pieces of Bitcoin or design related news or education. I think you're really going to find it valuable. So if you're interested, take a look. Go to sahilc.com/newsletter, give it a subscribe, and look forward to seeing you there. Now back to the episode. I agree. But I think I love what you're saying. I almost feel like as long as the team, the company leadership decides a point of view, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I was there at Unchained for a little bit. You've been there for a while. I think as long as the team has like a intent of like, because what you're saying is we may want the broadest audience. I imagine some teams don't want that. Like, I don't know. Right. I always bring up this example with like Sparrow. I don't think Craig wants the biggest,
insanely
total
badass
legend,
tool.
Total
just
legend.
The coolest tool ever.
It's the best. I use it
so
personally.
Impressive.
But I would be willing to bet his audience is not the entire world.
Yeah, that's totally right. There's a broad spectrum of tools.
Yeah. So I think as long as you're clear on what that is, but then once you decide who that audience is, then it makes, I think, decisions a lot easier. Where it's like, maybe the BitKey approach could make sense, or maybe a seedless approach might even make sense. I know that's controversial too. The longer I've been kind of away from Unchained, the more I've been like, maybe seedless.
What's meant by seedless?
Oh, just like for example, Casa they have an
Yeah.
approach where they don't use seeds. Now there's downsides there. I'm not making a official like statement or anything that seedless is better, but
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, so you think of it more from like a user experience point of view. So one weird thought that I've had, or like I think earlier on as a designer, I came at it from more like separating out UX and visual design, and you know, the UX is all that matters, and like
Yeah.
you can kind of do the rest. But now I'm like, and I think Skylar had a great tweet about this. Shout out to Skylar. He was basically implying that the interface, the visual design, and the UX are super intertwined. Like
Yeah.
how it makes you feel is the experience.
Hmm.
So I don't know. It's not directly related to what
I
you're
think
saying,
that's a
but
component of it. I mean, one thing I'd say is, so like early internet, which I didn't do that much programming in, my brother did actually, you know, was like very difficult to design things in. And people use lots of like table hacks. You'd align things in various tables, or there was whatever happened to the thing start with an F that was like, I don't know, there were lots of tools that have died away and been replaced by newer tools that are more conducive to the like evolved usage of the internet. So you know, Flexbox or Grid, which to my knowledge isn't actually like, it doesn't have that much adoption. Flexbox is huge though, because like what emerged is that like UX centered design, if you're going to distinguish between like the user experience and the visual stuff, has a whole bunch of inherent requirements or like patterns to it. And I think you've covered this in the design meetups that I've been to. You know, you and Paul will go over like grouping things together,
Gestalt principles, that kind of thing. Yeah.
like hierarchy in text, like enough white space to like allow people to read things easily. You know, there are features of like text, how wide the text is, that makes it easier or harder to read. There, you know, clarity and distinction of colors that are good for, what's it called, for people who can't see certain colors.
Oh, like colorblindness or whatever.
Colorblindness,
Yeah.
but yeah, the broader term of accessibility, etc.
Yeah.
So these things have like emerged in the tool set. And so lots of web design is starting to look the same. I think in part because the user experience requirements dictate to a great degree what is like visually, it's not quite appealing, but what visually works within those bounds. I mean, you can look at old things like I saw a tweet a little bit ago that showed the old Xbox, I think, like intro screen.
Yeah.
And just like mentioned that it would take like a modern web designer like a week to build it out. And how fucking cool did this look?
Yeah.
And you can agree with that because it's like deeply unaligned.
Yeah.
You have like this basically crescent shape with things laid out along the crescent, and like things are moving in the background. It's this like classic, like, I don't know, 90s video game vibe. And that has died out because, oh no, is there a poison oaky thing here?
I think there's some, there's a little bit of poison
I
ivy,
didn't
but
realize that. That's awful.
yeah, but you just don't touch it and you're good.
Yeah, but that sort of thing has died out.
Yeah.
I think because it doesn't actually serve the sort of experience requirements of a user. It's not really helping them, if the context becomes more complicated, solve their goals. And now there's more overlap between the visual and the user experience in the context of a whole set of tools and norms that have built up around like, you know, common utilities and, you know, drop downs and buttons and all these things that like weren't totally sorted out in the early internet days and are now just like the norms of the world that we know it.
There's like shelling points, or like a shelling point of like a pattern that a certain pattern ends up.
And I think in that context, the visual is like partially to help organize things well. So like you group things correctly, you put them in the same area, you put them in a box, you have hierarchy between like various text elements on the page. You have a call to action that's a bright color, and that there's like great consistency between this, and there's consistency between the spacing. And eventually like these things that are conceptual or user experience design oriented start to impart a sense of ease and like pleasantness, because they're so consistent and so clear and so like appropriately spaced in a way that your eye expects and is comfortable with, that they are visually pleasing as well. Like they bleed into each other, but I don't think the beauty comes from nowhere. it's related to the function.
It's related, and also like because I'm just thinking about, for example, at Foundry, it's not like a lot of the UI or even Unchained. It's not like a lot of the UI is unique or insanely different. I mean, these are all
Mm-hmm.
common patterns throughout the web. But
Mm-hmm.
to add to what you're saying, yeah, there's the like visual consistency. There's using common patterns, but then there's also how do you pull in your brand? Because when I think of brand, it's like
Mm-hmm.
what is the feeling when I sign up for Unchained right away from the moment to I go on the website
Mm-hmm.
or I interacted with Phil online or like
Mm-hmm.
Tom called me up and started the walk on board. Like
Yeah.
that's all part of the brand. And then how does that get pulled into the UI?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where I was going to do with that, but I feel like
Yeah,
that
it's a
was
component
related in
of it.
terms of yeah, the experience, the UI, the brand, all kind of comes together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different thing, web design, from like I was just thinking this is like incredibly obvious, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's not a painting. Beauty is a component of this thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like relegated to its context along with utility and then these like lingering
Mm-hmm.
senses that you want to impart on someone who's using this thing you've built.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't
So
know.
kind of
Mhm.
hard left, and might be a little bit tangential. I think it's pretty tangential, but I've been kind of dying to talk to you about this.
Hmm.
So this kind of ties in a few topics. So prototyping, right? I don't want to dive super deep into AI, but I think AI kind of may be part
Hmm.
of related
Mhm.
somehow. And the reason I think it's related is prototyping I find to be really useful for storytelling.
Mhm.
Obviously testing, right? If you want to test an idea with customers or people,
Mhm.
that's one. But for communicating, let's say you want to communicate with someone like you, a front end engineer, or like or like PM or a customer, or whatever. Figma prototyping is one thing, but do you prototype at all? Like, do you? I imagine you quickly put things together to be
Hmm.
like, this is how it works, this is how it feels. Talk about that. What's
Huh. I mean, I not too much because I think eventually the goal is to get to a place where the visual component of something is like pretty easy to slap together because all of the subcomponents are building blocks. So,
oh
like, I want in some way my goal, which is like maybe directly opposed to the goal of most designers,
mm,
is to like limit the artistic space like involved in the design process
yeah
by coming up with like pieces that are obviously perfect for like any design process you might build out,
mm,
so that by the time someone is considering designing a flow, it is a question of like understanding what are the goals, what are the like sub goals that stand in the way, and then how do you aggregate the pre-existing components like a drop down, like a
mm,
box, like a input, etc., to best solve that. And at that point building it out is really easy because you have like here's the spacing between inputs that is like our spacing between inputs.
yes
Here are the inputs, here's the button. Like that's a classic example of one of our forms. And you don't need to prototype it too much because you shouldn't even really need a Figma. The
mm,
designer should just be able to say, you've got like these three inputs in a
mm.
form, then you click the next button. It should almost be communicable by
That's
text.
so true actually, because like at the end of the day, the point of the Figma is just to communicate something, and
Mm-hmm.
the way even just taking a step back, the way I think about like the role of a designer or why we use Figma in the first place and not just code is like, and this is kind of related to
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying about how you constrain the solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But before you constrain, I think you may want to start off diverging into like 15
Mm-hmm.
different crazy directions. And maybe that's the job of the designer is to like
Mm-hmm.
start with diverging into a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of crazy directions
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually come back to something that works.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a bunch of Lego pieces that you've created
Yeah.
and you can use those maybe in creative ways.
Well, yeah, I think it's different at different parts in the process. So
Yeah.
if you're like the first designer at a company, there's a lot of wide open space. If you're late in the game, at Google, and you're building some intake form at Google,
Yeah.
your latitude is probably extremely minimal, and it ought to be
Yeah.
because consistency is an enormous value. I mean, in the same way, like each McDonald's is made to look identical because people like seek it out for something predictable and soothing.
Mm.
Maybe not soothing, given the lighting,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it's predictable.
I think, yeah. So you want there to be easy solutions. And then you also want to give designers or people driving product work the latitude to explore alternatives if they're really like relevant and ideal, but not,
Hmm.
I think there should be a default. I mean, and this is my side of the battle. Like
Hmm.
I fight for there being a default
Hmm.
that's so strong that you hardly have to write up a like create a design file to
Yeah, yeah.
communicate it in
Hmm.
many cases. You know, and that just I think has so many values. I really think the consistency is a huge part of the like just experience of going through something, like knowing where things will be, what an individual thing means, just like the speed with which you can move through an experience is really related to your enjoyment of it and
Oh,
your
for sure.
success at it. And also it makes it so much easier to build. It makes it so much easier to like convey intention. So if you
Maintain
can
later.
100%. So if you can get down, I mean, we were at a place, and I think we've largely exited it, where spacing between like all the elements all over the app was inconsistent. And if you want to fix that, you have to go to like 80 different
Yep.
places. If at some point we recently changed our default background from like a light gray to a white, and it was like a very easy thing to do because all the cards, quote unquote, we're using throughout the app are like one component, and you can just switch things out more easily.
I
Yeah.
remember when we went through all the areas of tech. Yeah, I mean, I remember we it was a painful but important process. We went through every
Mm-hmm.
thing of text, and we had to like put a class on it, and
Mm-hmm.
same with colors. And but I think it was worth it at the
Mm-hmm.
end. So yeah, I agree. Okay, so this is the other topic that I wanted to talk about. That I thought it was going to be a smooth transition, and this is not going to be a very good segue. And actually, we can turn around from here. I'd say.
Okay. We can
Yes, we're
retroactively make the transition.
retroactively in post.
Yeah.
Make it a smooth transition. No, but so when I was talking about prototyping, I was
Uh-huh.
also thinking of like AI tooling, because what you hear a lot about these days is like the line between design, engineering, and PM is kind of blurring. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts, and we've never talked about this, but like, do you have any opinions on that line being blurred on designers, coding with the help of Claude, with the help of Cursor, these kind of things, or do you just not think about it as much?
We can't use I would really love to use Cursor, but there are basically security requirements around the AI that we
Oh,
can use as
interesting.
engineers. We definitely use like an internal GPT type thing. It's hard still. I think like the big difficulty with AI is giving it sufficient context to, for instance, know that to be able to look at your Figma, to be able to associate your Figma with like a knowledge of the component library
Mm-hmm.
and be like, oh, that's a Unchained button and these are its props, etc. So I still think we're like actually kind of a ways from the end goal, which is like an elimination of the explicit engineer, certainly from like front end engineering. And so this is me like I like my job, but I think we'd probably the goal is like
Because you hear like design engineers, right? Hey, what's up? How's it going? We're recording a podcast.
you want to get in on
Do
it.
you want to say hi? We ran into Justin Moon on the trail.
Hi.
See you, dude.
Nice.
Yeah.
You're not cutting that.
Oh yeah. Actually, I'm not gonna cut that. I'll keep that in. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what happens in Austin in the Bitcoin scene. You
Uh-huh.
just run into father of the oldest or the best Bitcoin meetup. Anyway.
We're your CrossFit friends.
Oh, your
Yeah.
CrossFit friends. That's true.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
because
think
the
the end
design
goal is something
engineer.
like Minority Report minus the hand movements,
Oh, interesting.
or like the totalitarian government, but just the essentially computing becomes just an extension of your thought process.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're that far away from it, but I think on a technical level, the problem is clicking together all these pieces of context.
Yeah.
Maybe the cursor that takes control over your desktop
Yes.
is certainly moving in that direction. That looks incredibly badass. I can't really try it out on my work computer,
Got it.
which is a bummer. But
Yeah, I guess I didn't think of that. Yeah, from a security point of view, you can't be feeding in necessarily all this data. Okay. So,
no,
so
yeah.
you're not using it a ton. You think you're not? It's not.
No, I mean, we have,
external stuff.
yeah, there are tools that are vetted that basically I think we have LLMs that are running on our own machine and basically aren't leaking our private information out
Mm-hmm.
that we can then use embedded into our text editors.
Mm.
But they're not as strong or capable as Cursor, per my understanding. I haven't really used Cursor. I did just when it came out, but it has a broader sense of context. So I was listening, Lex Friedman interviewed a couple of the Cursor people, and they're talking about its ability to essentially complete your thought across contexts. So instead of you type a comment or you start a function and it finishes it, or you can auto-complete the rest of your line, Cursor is then saying like, oh, you just built an API request, but you don't have the API.
Oh, okay.
Let's jump over to your controllers in the adjacent project and add that API function. And then, oh, that API function requires a model that hasn't been built out yet. Let's go into the model layer of the back end. And
it's very Clippy-like. Like it's very like kind of prompting you like, oh, this. Yeah. You wanted to do this, but we don't have this other thing. Do you want help with this? Yeah.
And the eventual goal is mind reading, right?
Yeah.
Is like the expression of intent becomes transmuted into the result. And there are some cases where that's already working beautifully, but I think in a complicated system that has a lot of context, there's just an enormous amount of work that has to be done to make it as effective as a person. But it's happening, and it will happen. And when it does, I'm happy Bitcoin exists. Because I am not sure I'll have a job.
I don't want to deal with this,
Or I don't know what my job will be. Yeah.
Fair enough, dude.
I mean, my goal is to like, I think Luddites, we were talking about this the other day, the Luddites have always been right in that like the technology was in fact bad for them. There's the sort of like more philosophical question of whether the technology is bad generally, whether it like brings us away from tribal society, makes life harder, etc. There's certainly trade-offs.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing, regardless of where you land on that philosophically, you want to do when a new technology comes is like try to do your best to remain in control of it.
Yeah.
And on the right side of it. Not to just like sit tight and hope it goes away.
which because I see that a lot in the design world too. There's a lot of like, I don't know what the right word is, copium, or it's like just being fearful of that.
It's a fun word.
Yeah, it's just like fearful of these tools, and they're just tools. Figma has, released AI feature, and then there was a lot of backlash, and then they had to redo it again. Anyway, long story short.
What was the backlash?
Well, so honestly, the backlash was just their storytelling. So the feature is basically you type in what you want, and it'll build a screen with pre-built components. So I want a website about this, and it'll just design it up. And I think it was their storytelling that freaked people out. Was the storytelling of the feature was called make design, and people were like, what do you mean make design? You can't just make a design. That's not what designers do. So now they smartly changed the name to first draft, which makes a lot more sense. And people are like, oh, okay, it's not stealing my job yet. So I think it's just people being kind of nervous about this stuff, but
it is. I mean, it is the most incredibly cool. It's just such mind-bogglingly amazing technology.
It's pretty amazing.
I use it like many times a day now.
Yeah,
and it's
I talk to the GPT voice thing.
Absolute best.
Yeah,
it's just gonna be so cool. I do feel like primarily a great degree of optimism about the technological future.
Oh, I agree.
It's gonna be.
Now, how about the opposite of optimism?
Nice.
Do you have okay, so you've worked with designers, obviously at Unchained. We've done projects together. You've worked at the agency, basically.
Yeah.
Do you have any hot takes? Any hot takes on design? On either design as a discipline, maybe some design principles, maybe hot takes on working with designers. So maybe another way to phrase that is like any gripes working with designers, like.
Well, I mean, I think I've sort of spoken to some of it. I do feel like my goal is to minimize the amount of creative work that a designer is doing.
I just want to end all this.
No, but like I think because I'm so focused on consistency.
Yeah.
Like I think the foundational work is like everything. You do great foundational work. You have great pieces.
Yeah.
And then the design should be so intuitive. It's intuitive for a non-designer to guess what it should be. Right? Like I should be like, oh, we want this information. Obviously, we use these things to get it. And I mean, and then the other hot take is like, a pushback / like almost a degree of resentment about like visually focused design. When it's all about the visual, I enter this mode where I'm like, oh damn it, this is gonna take like 2 weeks and totally not be worth
Do
it.
you have an example of that?
Yeah, we just do these like multi-stage bespoke animations for like tiny things at our design company, and it's just like there was one actually. We were designing a new app for Kaiser Permanente, and there was it was a prototype phone app. So we were using, I think, React Native for it, which isn't for those who aren't technical.
Yeah.
It was an attempt to use this web design tool or web development tool to compile into Swift or other like phone appropriate technologies, but it was very difficult to access the underlying machinery of the phone if you wanted to do something fancy. And what we wanted to do was have like an extremely smooth animation of the background color of the app as you swept between panes. So as you moved from like my message center to my health or whatever, which have different sort of brand colors, the whole thing should interpolate the colors smoothly in a way that felt natural. And this was, again, a complete prototype. So, you know, it's never actually getting built. They're going to toss this code out. We're just trying to like show them what it would look like. And the CEO, who again, I think is a great salesperson, I liked him a lot, but is like, you know, one of those high attention to detail people who gets things done because he's just a total pain in the ass in many contexts, like came up and just started swiping his thumb on the phone and being like, the frame rate's too low, the frame rate's too low, this sucks, I want this to be smooth. I'm like, dude, you're just asking for like months of work for like the smallest thing that doesn't, even in the real world, meaningfully impact like the functional user experience. And in this context, sorry, I'm on a rant now.
No,
but in this context of like a demo, is like they get it. It'll transition the background color. Their actual iPhone developers can do that. We're on a tight budget, and we've got so much else to do, and it's so unrelated to the functionality.
You're trying to be more realistic, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think the over-indexing on the sort of visual, experiential animation is particularly hard.
Yeah.
I think is poor prioritization.
So then how do you decide, because I've thought about this too, how do you decide like what hills to die on? Like in that scenario, of course, maybe you can't die on that hill because that's the purpose of a company, is to
yeah. I had no leverage at all.
Yeah, but I imagine if like Courtney or Martin did that at Unchained, how do you approach that conversation? Or like if someone's listening, like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think I got a lot from this guy, the same CEO. You know, it's like the trade-offs. It's like, okay, great, we can do that. It's going to take us like 3 weeks, or whatever. That's probably an overstatement in this context, but it's going to like push us behind like a schedule that there are a bunch of stakeholders who would want to move ahead. Is it worth that? Is one part of it. Like, happy to do it, somewhat sarcastically.
Yeah.
But you know, here's what it will cost. And then, I mean, I think the other component is there's an old XKCD, are you familiar, like online? Yeah, cartoon that was a graph of how much time it takes to like to create some sort of automatic function up front versus how much time it saves you each iteration and how many iterations it will take to pay back your time. So what's an example? You know, if you've ever heard Guy Swan talk about his automations related to podcasts, using AI, like cleaning up his podcasts, moving various file types between various directories on his computer, he used to do these things manually. He got AI to write some scripts for him. And essentially, whether it pays off to write these scripts has something to do with like how central this use case is to him, and how long it takes him to write the scripts, and how frequently, like how much time he's saving per actual use, how frequently he's using it, and how long it took him to write up front. So that's all to say that if you're, say, doing some animation, it makes a lot more sense if it's for something foundational that's going to be used consistently. So if it's like a tweak to buttons to make, you know, buttons or loading icons or something a little more delightful, but you see them literally like 1,000 times, that's much more worth a couple hours of time than if it's for like a single animation on a single screen, unless that screen is like the most important. So there has to be some
maybe like
context.
impact is one way of measuring. if you're gonna die on that hill, is like, is this? Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I also think, yeah, well, I don't have to get into animation in particular, but it essentially adds all these like states. It adds a great degree of like conceptual complexity. And there are certain animations that don't at all, that don't have like multiple stages, and so are just much simpler, or that are built into CSS. So I think it's really as you're trying to communicate the inherent trade-offs in given the technology. And I think often if you do that honestly and upfront, like you're dealing with reasonable people who are rowing a boat in the same direction, and you'll arrive at some consensus without too much difficulty.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I think that's reasonable. That kind of tracks. Is there anything you feel like and you don't have to get into specifics because obviously Unchained as a private company, and everything, but is there anything you feel like you're struggling with? Maybe not on the back end side of things, but maybe on the front end side of things. Like, is there something that's just
technically front end? Like,
yeah, checking the front end. It could be design systems related. It could be maybe not too nerdy like front end architecture stuff, but like something that designers would maybe resonate with, or on the front end side, or design systems, maybe. Hey, just a really quick break to tell you about the Studio 21 newsletter. If you're interested in Bitcoin and design, every month I highlight a few key pieces of Bitcoin or design related news or education. I think you're really going to find it valuable. So if you're interested, take a look. Go to sahilc.com/newsletter, give it a subscribe, and look forward to seeing you there. Now back to the episode.
No, I'd say I'm just generally a consistency nut.
Yeah.
So like like a cleanup, like a broken windows. I was talking to Buck about this recently.
Yeah.
And I was made aware again that there are two. Broken windows refers to two things broadly. There's like the Frederick Bastiat story, economic
The broken
story.
window fallacy. The
broken window fallacy. And then there's broken windows policing. I mean, the latter, which is just like if you see a broken window or graffiti on the wall, or someone jumping over a turnstile, sort of like minor infractions against like societal order, odds are higher that people will do other things that violate the order.
Maybe because it sets the tone. I don't know if that's what you're trying to get at, but it like sets a tone.
I think like basically most people, there was a Malcolm Gladwell thing a while ago about like how do riots start? And it's like basically there's like 100 people, and out of those 100 people there's like one person who's willing to throw a brick in the window. But there are like maybe 3 people who are willing to throw a brick in the window, having seen a person throw a brick in the window. And like 10 people who are willing to like jump on a car if they've seen that. And like that's how it snowballs.
Wow.
And I just sort of, like one of my roles at Unchained has been to be like the cleanup person, where I'm just like, this directory structure is insane and we can't keep following it. Like we can't have these different colors. We should follow the same patterns for everything.
I feel like I can vividly remember many examples of just like you screen sharing something or me screen sharing something and unrelated, and you just audibly are like, shh, we need to clean that. We need to fix this. Yeah. So that's,
well, we're like a bank. That's the idea.
Yeah.
We're like, luckily we're not actually like completely custodying your money.
Yeah.
But we are, the people you trust with potentially your family fortune.
Yeah.
And it does in fact indicate your comfort with that decision, or that potential decision to like look at something that is awry or inconsistent visually. And I think the engineers feel the same looking at the code base. And there's a sense where you're like flying, almost, it's similar to the AI future we're talking about, where you're just like, you're in flow if you know where everything goes. There used to be, with Ruby on Rails, to bring it back, one of the beautiful things about it was there was like at some point it gets boring because it's so straightforward, but there's such clear patterns about what you do. Like if you want to have a blog, you create the blog data model, and then you have the blog's controllers, with an index action and a show action, and these like there are patterns that you follow to a T, and it reduces so much of the complexity. It's well designed for the engineers.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to get if you want to be able to move quickly and consistently and maintain things well. And the problem is inevitably that's like not the space you're in when you're building out the initial project. So when like
because you're moving fast,
stayed awake for like 4 years, like coding this alone with a bunch of interns, and like drinking tons of coffee. He's just like putting together incredible, complicated things, much of it outside of his comfort zone as like a hot front-end engineer, etc. And then, we show up a couple years later and we're like, man, we should really get this into the sort of order where it can be like maintained effectively and built on as a solid structure for years to come. Yeah. So I don't know, the structure of our routes file. It's the thing I was recently working on, trying to get people to only pull icons from one place so that we have like one source of truth for icons.
I think this stuff is so interesting to listen to for me personally. I hope this is useful for people because like sometimes just hearing about like what somebody working at an actual company that serves a lot of clients, real money, real production, just like hearing the bullshit sometimes you have to just deal with. I think it's kind of interesting. And that's kind of why I wanted to start this was like, I remember having conversations with like people like you or Nate. Nate was previously at Unchained, now he's at ZapRight. Just like this kind of stuff is so fascinating to me. Anyway, so
yeah, well, you can't get it right the first time around at all. You're just not going to.
Right.
And I've done so many projects on my own. Like I've done some freelance work over the years where you just choose the wrong technology. Like, because you don't want to use something old because there's no excitement behind it. And it doesn't, the new stuff is being built for a reason. It solves problems. But if you choose the thing that's too new, there's a chance it's the wrong thing. And there's just like 5 years down the line, some part of it in the line of tools breaks, and you made all these architectural decisions that went out of fashion, and it's just it's hard. So it's a living software is like unavoidably a living thing. I mean, I know there's that Levels.io guy on Twitter, who built like nomads.com like basically on his own and does no upkeep, and he's just seems extraordinarily competent and on top of shit. But I think by and large, you're building something complicated. It has complexity you can't prefigure. I don't know if that's the right word, that you can't really like think your way around without diving into it. You will make mistakes. People will misunderstand things. Complexities will accrue, and there has to be like a pruning process that maintains the quality of things across time.
No, I think that makes total sense. And then I guess that's like you said, a big part of what you're doing at Unchained, which is great. And so bring it back to kind of, I think as we start to like wrap up, I guess. So back to Unchained, where do you see Bitcoin design going? Big question, loaded question. But, I think Unchained is at the forefront of self-custody UX. Yeah, I don't know. Where do you see things going overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has so much to do with who the customer is. I think we're like trending towards this world where the customer is increasingly not like your present day Bitcoiner, as in it is a unreasonable assumption for them to understand what the mempool is or what the difference is between like Lightning and Bitcoin, or necessarily to maintain a separate device from their iPhone, at least until they have a substantial amount of their net worth in Bitcoin. So I think the Peter McCormicks of this world are gonna characterize the next couple years of Bitcoin mainstreaming, which it could be happening.
It's happening.
It's going to be wild.
It's happening in the last
I
16
think
years.
we're going to end up with a lot of trade-offs against the sort of best practices that the hardcore maxis have rightly arrived at, and we're going to have to try to mix our quote unquote wisdom in to the actual context of like knowledge and willingness to
like real
study
life.
up on anything.
Like real. What is real life? Okay. I like that.
I mean, it's a very broad.
No.
Yeah, I see like various address types as becoming completely interchangeable. I'm not talking like pay to witness, script hash, or whatever, but like Lightning, Bitcoin, Fedi, Cashew, perhaps if that comes up, like we are going to have to figure out some sorts of protocols that treat everything as the same, so it all becomes abstracted away in 90% of use cases, and it is just money. And you can take your phone and tap it on the thing, and it, you pay the money, you send the money, it chooses the means that maybe there's some setting where you're like, how much do I care about privacy? How much do I care about like final settlement? No one knows what that is. Probably not that one, but yeah.
I think it's exciting, isn't it?
I'm into
to me,
it.
it's really exciting. Yeah, man. Dude,
I felt the UX of it wasn't. I thought it was really interesting going to. I went to the El Salvador conf.
Yeah.
A few years ago, and it was like not quite there yet. Like I tried paying at the place that was at Bitcoin Beach, and it was annoying for the waiters because it wasn't tied into their back end systems, and I needed internet because I didn't have like service, so I couldn't pay people until I asked them for their Wi-Fi and connected to it, and I had to get like the right waiter over and all this. There's just like a lot of distance between us and like the seamlessness that characterizes like modern dollar payments.
Yeah. But I think the good news is we're getting there. And I think there's builders. I was going to say engineers, but I mean, I feel like we're all kind of just builders. So builders like you, like other people I'm trying to talk to, I think we're making it, we're going to make it work. We're going to win, as Marty would say.
Yeah, it's very nice.
So yeah, thanks for chatting with me, I guess.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? And how can people be useful to you? Does that make sense? Like if someone's listening and is like, they want to reach out to you, and then is there something you're looking for? Something like, do you write a blog? Do you have a Twitter that you use a lot or not?
Not really.
Ooh,
so I have a Twitter, but I just follow things, which I think is extremely healthy.
Okay.
But I follow them to an unhealthy degree. So
do you want people following you there? Not really.
Nah, it's fine.
Okay, so no Twitter then.
In terms of helping me,
yeah.
I mean, people can find me. I'm Sasha. That's my name. Sasha.
Yeah.
Klein. Sasha F. Klein.
It'll be in the notes. Yeah.
Yeah. On Twitter, but it's someone was singing.
Yeah. This is the trail in Austin. This is the way it goes.
Yeah, but no, I'm doing good. I'm enjoying. I like.
Okay. So no, like you don't have any call to actions.
Buy some Bitcoin.
Buy some Bitcoin.
It's
I love
about
it.
to go up in price.
Cool. Buy some Bitcoin. Check out Sasha. I'll plug Sasha if you won't plug him. Check out his Twitter. Blow him up. All the the millions of people listening to this. But yeah, anyway, go ahead. Thanks for listening. And
thanks, dude.
Yeah, thanks for being on. And I'll see you next time, I guess.
Very fun.
Okay, that's it for this walk and talk conversation on Bitcoin design. Hope you found something interesting from it. Hope you got some interesting nuggets. If you liked it, and if you want to, feel free to give it a review. Share it with someone else who might find it interesting. And genuinely, if you have any feedback, I really, really want to hear about it, positive or negative. So find me on Twitter at SahilC0, and I look forward to seeing you next time.